So as a people, the Japanese are not famous for their prowess in the English language. And this is kind of strange when you think about it, because almost all Japanese study English for 3 years in junior high, 3 years in high school, 4 years in elementary school now, so 10 years total. You'd think they'd be better at it as a people, and yet they're really not. Although it's getting better these days a little bit, I'd argue. But I think this comes down to 8 fundamental sort of weaknesses that the Japanese have when it comes to English. 8 problems, misunderstandings they have about English, which if you as a teacher, as an ALT, JT, whoever you are, if you can help your students to overcome these 8 problems, then your students are much further on their way to becoming much better speakers of English. So here are the 8 weaknesses. Let's get into it. The first weakness that a lot of Japanese have is just in simply not understanding the meaning of the verb be. Now, be takes many forms, of course. Am, are, is, past tense, was, were. And it's ubiquitous from elementary school 3rd grade. They get it all the time. But most teachers never take the time to explain what the am of I am, or the are of you are, or the is of he, she, it is mean. And if you ask a lot of students what the am of I am James, for example, is, they'll say am is the Japanese particle wa. And am is very much not the Japanese particle wa. In Japanese, I don't want to get off on a Japanese tangent here, but wa, of course, marks the topic of the sentence. So watashi wa means I, topic. Whereas the verb be, of course, am, are, is, past tense, was, were, means existence or presence. But okay, anyway, my point is it's very important, and it's a verb, of course. And I see why Japanese people make this mistake, because if you say, I am James, translated into Japanese, becomes something like watashi wa Jamesu, with an optional des on the end, but we can wave our hands at that. So yeah, the am and the wa kind of overlap. So you see where the confusion arises. But it leads to mistakes like the following: I am play tennis, because the Japanese are thinking in their head, watashi wa tennisu wo suru, or something like that. My partial solution to this is, particularly in junior high school, maybe first year junior high school, I will actually write on the board, if I'm writing I am James, for example, I'll underline the am and ask them, what does this word mean in Japanese? And a non-zero number of students will raise their hand and say, wa, and it's not wa. So I actually write on the board, dearu, dearu, and I like dearu because it's obviously a verb. Ordinarily in conversation, the Japanese would probably say des, but wave our hands at that. So yeah, I'd encourage you to make it clear to your students what the exact meaning of, the verb be, am, are, is, past tense, was, were, actually is, and that it's not wa. So a second weakness for the Japanese when it comes to English has to do with the third person singular s. This is the s on plays of he plays tennis. The third person singular s is completely absent from elementary school English. The 5th and 6th graders actually get he and she, so they get the third person okay. But they only learn to say he is or she is, like he is a teacher or she is a pilot or something. And they learn the helping verb can too. He can play guitar, she can play piano, like that. But they never learn, in elementary school anyway, he plays the piano or she plays the guitar or whatever it is. So students encounter the third person singular s for the first time in the 1st grade of junior high school. And most students get it pretty well, is my sense. But unfortunately, most teachers, JTEs and ALTs alike, fail to review the third person singular s in the 2nd and 3rd years. So 1st year students can do it pretty well, use it pretty well, but then they fall out of practice. And 2nd graders, 3rd graders, you'll hear them say things like he play tennis or she have a guitar or something like that. So for you in the classroom, I'd recommend you spend some time with the 2nd and 3rd grade junior high school students reviewing the third person singular s. It's worth noting here that I think one of the problems is that the Japanese term for third person singular is sanninshou tansuke, okay? And so you'll hear the students say, if you point to the s on plays, for example, and you say, what is this? They'll pair it back. They'll say santangen or sanninshou tansuke or something. And they're not wrong, but they're making the right sounds. But if you then, ask them, okay, so what does sanninshou mean? What does third person mean? They'll shrug their shoulders. They don't know. They know the word, but they don't know what it means. So they don't really know anything. That's part of the problem, I think. The third weakness of Japanese English generally, I think, has to do with singulars and plurals. Singulars and plurals are not completely absent from Japanese, but largely. For the most part, you don't have to think about whether you're talking about one item or many items. But of course, singular and plural, the distinction between singular and plural nouns and verbs is just absolutely ubiquitous in English. We're thinking about it constantly. So what I would suggest you do in the classroom is do some games and activities that involve taking a sentence with a singular noun in it. For example, this car is new, and tell them, okay, let's change this, turn car into cars. How does the sentence change? And of course, this car is new. It changes 3 of the 4 words in that sentence change. These cars are new. And that can be quite hard for them, but for that very reason, it's worth practicing. Weak point number 4 has to do with the distinction between, or lack of understanding of the distinction between yes/no questions and what I will call WH questions. So often, if you ask a student, for example, do you like sports? The student will come back and say, I like soccer. And that's not really the answer to the question, is it? If you ask, do you like sports? That's a yes/no question, which calls for yes, I do, or no, I don't, or equivalent. I like soccer is the answer to a question like, what sport do you like? So there's a mismatch going on. So as you teach, as you introduce these questions, I would encourage you to encourage your students to, given a particular question, let's say, spend some time considering, okay, is it a yes/no question? Does it call for a yes, I do, or a no, I don't, for example? Or is there a WH question word in there and it calls for information other than yes or no? So a fifth weakness is, or are rather, the definite and indefinite articles in English. This is the and a of the book and a book, for example. So just a quick review so we're all on the same page. The book refers to the specific book, which we all know which one we're talking about, where a book is not any particular specific book, but rather just any book. So that's the difference. Now, if you ask a lot of Japanese students what a book means, what the of a book means, they'll say it's singular. And they're not wrong that it's singular. We do use with countable singular nouns exclusively, but it doesn't mean singular per se. Note that the Japanese language has no equivalent for a book and the book, not really. They have different keywords they can optionally use in the sentence to specify a specific item or a unspecific item, but they don't have dedicated articles like we have in English. A sixth weak point of Japanese understanding of English has to do with post-modification. And credit to you if you know what that word means. In Japanese, it's kochi shushoku. I actually knew the Japanese term kochi shushoku because I learned it in Japan, and I had to look it up. Post-modification. Who'd have thunk it? This has to do with the idea of where you place adjectives or adjectival phrases or clauses. So to review, if you're a native speaker, you know this intuitively, of course, but if you have a single word adjective modifying a noun, we put it in front of the noun. For example, we say, new car, fast car, my car, the car. Now, these words, new and fast and my and the, these are all functioning as adjectives, of course. The first two, obviously. My is a possessive adjective, but an adjective nonetheless. The definite article, the, is actually, it's called a determiner, I learned in preparing for this video. But they're all functioning as adjectives, of course, and because they're single words, we put them naturally in front of the noun. No problem. But take these examples. Car over there, car that I saw, car coming this way, car with a dent. Notice that the over there of car over there, or the that I saw of car that I saw, etc. These are 2, 3, 4, they're multiple words, but they're functioning together as a singular adjective. But we don't put them in front of the noun, we put them in back. So in English, the rule is single word adjectives, when they modify a noun directly, they go in front of that noun, and multiple word adjectival phrases and clauses, they go after the noun that you're modifying. This is hard for the Japanese to wrap their minds around because in Japanese, as you may know if you've studied Japanese at all, every adjectival modifier goes in front of the noun that it modifies. So for example, if I say, the book that I read was interesting, in Japanese you would say that the I read book was interesting. My point here is that this idea of kochi shushoku doesn't seem to be taught generally, doesn't seem to be taught explicitly by the teachers. They just sort of hope that the students will pick up on it, I guess. I think it's worth explaining to the students explicitly and making sure that they actually get it. Seventh weakness of the Japanese understanding of English has to do with the difference between the future tense will and be going to. If I say I will write an autobiography or I am going to write my autobiography, on the surface, they seem pretty darn close, but I will help you, I am going to help you. These kind of have different nuances, don't they? There is famously no future tense in Japanese, so both of these, will and be going to, can be a little bit difficult for them to wrap their heads around. And For the purpose of this video, I'm going to wave my hands at the differences between will and be going to, but just as an ALT, you should be aware that there is a difference between them, difference in usage, difference in meaning, and it's certainly worth making your students understand that there is a difference. As an aside, Japanese junior high school students get the future tense, will and be going to, often at the same time, by the way, on the same page sometimes, in the second year of junior high school. I don't think it's worth teaching the difference between will and be going to junior high second grade. Just teach, they're both for future stuff that's going to happen down the road in the future, not now, not yesterday, but tomorrow, for example, next week, for example. And there is a slight difference, but we'll wave our hands at the difference for now. When they get into high school, then you can explain the difference, I think. And the 8th, then, for this list, final weakness that Japanese have when it comes to their understanding of English has to do with simply making questions and negatives. Japanese people, Japanese students of English can be very bad at this. So if you're given a sentence like, for example, Tom lives in Tokyo, Japanese students should ideally be able, junior high at least, after they've learned the third person singular S, they should be able to take that sentence, Tom lives in Tokyo, and change that into the question form, the yes-no question form, and the negative form. So, for example, Tom lives in Tokyo. Does Tom live in Tokyo? Tom does not live in Tokyo. It's easy, of course, for native speakers to do without thinking, but it's worth drilling with your students because this ability to kind of automatically, on the fly, create questions, yes-no questions, and negatives using the keyword not is incredibly useful, and they really need to know how to do this. So that's it. In my view, those are the 8 real weaknesses that Japanese have when it comes to their understanding of English. Do what you can as an ALT to help your students overcome these weaknesses, and your students will thank you, and Japan will be a better place thanks to you. Thanks again for watching, as always. If you have a question or comment, obviously leave any questions in the comment section below, and I always go out of my way to answer those. And I really enjoy making these videos, and I want to thank you for watching. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.